Hello and welcome to the video. This is a quick update to update you on some stuff that's going on with Walksnail at the moment and things that I'm doing here. Now, for those of you that watch the channel a lot, you'll know that just recently they released a new version of the goggles, the Goggles L, and I'm playing with those. One of the big things that had was the ability to use the inbuilt head tracker, and that is hopefully something that's going to be coming to the Walksnail Goggle X this month too. Fingers crossed. Now, the other thing that a lot of you have been asking about is this thing here, this thing at the front. This is something called a GM3 gimbal. Now, Walksnail have made three versions. The GM1 and GM2, I think they've made a mistake with how they set those up. But I've got my hands on a GM3 one here. This is the battery hatch, as you probably already spotted, of the Reptile Dragon 2. And when I was talking, getting that plane in, this is exactly what I had in mind for it. And you can see here that I've built out a whole setup. I'm going to go through in a much closer in a second about what I've done here. GM3 gimbal with a moonlight setup on the back, and it's all ready to plug into that model to go and fly. I've got one little issue with it at the moment. I think this is because it was a beta review unit. I'm struggling to update it, but more about that in a moment. As well as this, there is also a new avatar unit that has been released as well. It's kind of slid under the radar a little bit. The GT version, the most powerful avatar unit in terms of transmission power that we've seen. So I'll show you that. And the last thing is there is a new firmware version that's out as well. The firmware version's needed, particularly if you're going to be playing with all this head tracking malarkey, which I am. However, there is something quite cool hidden away in there too. So I'll go through what that is and a couple of things that you might have missed. So the first thing to take a look at is the GM3 Axis gimbal. Now, Cadix FPV have released a little video of their own that explains how you set this up. I'll put a link down below if you want to go and check that out. It explains how to connect it to an avatar unit. I've made a mount for it that has a moonlight avatar at the rear, and then the camera for that, the moonlight camera, is here on the front of the gimbal itself. And this whole thing has been designed to go on top of my Reptile Dragon 2. I think this seems to be a very common option from what I'm seeing online. Lots of people are doing these kind of things. I have shared this design on Thingiverse. I'll put a link down below so you can go and check that out. The big tips I'll give you is you will need some 6mm M2 screws and some 6mm M3 screws to put it all together. And the other big tip is make sure that the last thing that you put on, you screw the base onto the top of the canopy and use it upside down so the flat side's on the top. The other big tip is that screw that into place first using the M3 screws. The last thing you do is actually attach the moonlight unit onto here. Now, how it's actually done here, this is the really clever part, and one thing that I hadn't clicked. The cables that come out of the back of the gimbal, you can see it's soft mounted here at the front, go into this bottom port. So this bottom port here on the avatar unit is actually sending the information to move the gimbal around. So the information about where the head tracker is sensing your head position is sent over the avatar link, not through anything else. And that means that you don't need some kind of flight controller or anything more sophisticated than that. Even if you've got a very basic receiver, you want to put this on something like a car, a boat, or something else. It's all done within the avatar system, and that is really cool. However, you do need one of these V2 style units here that has this port that you can plug this into. There is also another cable from the gimbal that allows you to connect it and control it for other ways. But let's be honest, I think this is the way that they've thought about actually putting it together. The only thing I will mention is here you can see I have offset the Avatar Moonlight VTX unit from the base using a couple of bits of wood. These are actually little strips of lollipop sticks, of all things, ice lolly sticks, and that means that there is airflow underneath, but also as this unit gets hot, it isn't going to melt any of the plastic. To then set it up, you need to go into the head tracker menu in the goggles and set it up for the non-PPM connection, and all of the settings are in there. Unfortunately, I haven't got this all working quite yet. This moonlight unit that I've got on here was the one I was sent to review. It's got a beta version of the firmware on it, and I'm struggling to update it. So I've asked Walksnail if they can give me a bit of help with that, because it does need the latest version. And again, we're going to talk about the firmware in a minute, because the latest version of firmware has kind of shown a couple of new tricks with the system too. In terms of the way that the gimbal itself is set up, I'm pretty impressed. I do wish that the GM1 and GM2 had been pan and tilt versions. They really seem to have made a very odd decision there with those two rather than the ways that they've done it. With this one, it's soft mounted, and the soft mounts are here at the front of this 3D printed part, and this gives pan tilt. Now if I power this and show you what it looks like as it moves around, it does seem to be very gently just smoothing out the movement, even if it isn't receiving any live head tracker input. So I'm fascinated to see how this is actually going to work in flight, and this is something that I'm personally very excited about. This is probably the most excited I've been about something new in quite a long time. The ability to have 3-axis head tracking from the avatar unit and be able to look around in glorious HD as I fly is something that I've wanted for a very long time. Next thing to talk about then is the latest avatar unit. This has just been released and was kind of released pretty quietly. It's not currently, as I'm recording this, on the Walksnail website, but it is listed on lots of other places. This is the new Avatar GT unit. Headlines on this: it is 2 watts maximum power, so capable, I'm guessing, of those longer range flights. Avatar Pro camera is attached. It also has a fan on the top. Now I know some people have been complaining that their Avatar units are getting very hot in sunny conditions, and I find that so long as I mount my Avatar units, particularly on flying vehicles, in airflow and just plug them in before I go and fly, I'm not having any issues at all. But then I'm not living in Florida or in the middle of Texas. However, I did have an issue, if you remember, with one of these units on the top of a radio controlled car when I was playing with another gimbal. That was overheating as it was just trundling around. This would also potentially be a nice option for that as well. I hope that they bring out other versions that have this kind of automatic cooling on, because for cars and boats that don't have really high airflow, it's a fantastic way, an option to keep everything nice and cool as you're zooming around. Sony Starvis 2 sensor, so it's 1080p 60 frames a second up to 1080p 120 frames a second. Ratio is 4:3:69, lens 2.1mm, field of view is 160 degrees. The shutter is a rolling shutter, and the minimum illumination is about 0.01 lux, so it still should be good in overcast conditions. Weight is about 9.5 grams, dimensions 19 by 19 by 24 millimeters, and it's got a 140 millimeter coaxial cable, and it does support gyro flow. SD card on the side, so you can save your recordings locally and get them off, and it's also using a JST 1.0 connection for the power cable, and that again comes in the box along with the screws that you need. Last thing to talk about then is the latest firmware that has just been released. This is the official firmware that came out that supports the Goggles L that I reviewed recently. This is 38.43.4, and it has the stuff in here that I need to update that Moonlight so that it's going to work with the Goggles L, but it's also supporting the Goggles L as well. It has a couple of extra things in here. It's the version that supports the new Avatar GT that we just looked at, and also supports the Goggles X beta app. Now, some people have been talking about this already. I haven't. I try and respect the NDA that I've got with Walksnail. This is an app that you can run on an Android device. It's an APK file, and you can do things with your goggles. Once it has been officially released, I'll do a full video about it. But interestingly, the files for the beta app are also in the download. So if you want to put that onto your Android device and play with it, they're actually putting it out there in the community to have a test. This is big news for this beta app. I know quite a few of you have been waiting to get your hands on it. So there we have it, quite a few new things from Walksnail. They continue to bring out new products, and the cool thing is, as normal, it all works together. I occasionally bump into issues updating firmware, but that seems to be more about the fact that I've been shipped review units that are using beta versions of stuff, and I'm sure I'll get this Walksnail unit attached to the gimbal working soon. But if you have any questions, don't forget I have a full Walksnail playlist that takes you through everything, including why I chose Walksnail as the HD system of choice. Thank you for watching my video. Check out the playlist, and adding Painless 360 to your search terms will help you find my content. If you haven't done so already, please hit the like and subscribe button. It helps a lot. You can support the time I spend here answering questions and helping others by using the links in the video description.